What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. I just bailed Matt out of jail about 4 hours ago. We also got his C4 out of impound. So he's gonna go ahead and do an interview with us today about what he likes about his C4, his buying experience, and what it's like to own a 1985 Corvette. So I'm here with Matt, and he's going to give us a tour of his 1985 C4 Chevrolet Corvette with that awesome TPI motor. Okay, Matt, so tell us, how long have you owned it?
I've had this Corvette since fall of last year, so it's a relatively new purchase.
Now, since you've owned it, have you had any big issues or any big money dumps out of the wallet you had to take?
Well, yeah, let's talk about some of those issues. One of the first things I dealt with, and I kind of alluded to this back when we were discussing TPI engines in general, is the injectors. In my case, the injectors all fired, but they were plugged from this thing having probably set for a long time. And that's another thing, kind of, you get into that when you deal with cars that have been sitting. Everyone talks about barn finds. Barn finds can be a big headache. This, I don't think, necessarily meets that criteria, but it sat long enough that we had to get some fuel and things. But
so when you bought it, it had been setting.
I think it had been, just based on what I found inside the engine.
Okay, so one of our videos for buyer's guides is vets that set, not always the best investment.
No.
So was it the bad fuel that ate the injectors?
The injectors work, it's just they're a little bit plugged. They needed some refreshment, and I've been driving it around, and sometimes you do a little bit of that Italian tune-up. Right now it seems to be running okay. But like I said, maintenance issues, we do have other things. Overall, the car just feels great. It's one of these kind of things, and it's a unique C4 experience. You get into C4, and it's almost hard to put into words. It's like a big happy go-kart with a V8 strapped into it. The thing is just amazing in that sense.
I agree.
You know what, let's take a look at the interior. One of the things I like most about this car, and it's such a classic and iconic thing, is again the interiors. I'm a sucker for 1980s cars. Anything to do with the digital dash, anything that reminds me of that Starship Enterprise, man, I'm a sucker for it. And for some people, that's why they get sold on these cars.
Did Counselor Troy give you a hard on like me?
Oh yeah.
Nerd alert, nerd alert.
Speaking of interior, just certain design cues of this car just really do it for me. These like suicide style quick release doors, I love that. I really have always liked that. And for those who are kind of more familiar with GM products in general, these are the same door latches they used on the Camaros. Just a really cool design cue. Some people hate them, I love them. The color choice. One thing I did like about this car, red interior. I am a sucker for red interiors. Really like seeing that.
What is the car color now?
So that's a good question. This car is, it's been resprayed once. It's a repaint. It's listed, or at least it was listed when I bought it, as being a silver Corvette, which of course we have silver paint. You can see it along the door trim right here. Not a bad repaint job, but again, for those who are interested in buying used Corvettes, that's something to be aware of. Somebody may have touched up the paint. It may have had an entire repaint, like what's the case with this car. So it's not a bad thing, but you always want to look at quality. And again, it's all about quality versus price put into it.
Have you had any major issues with your dash or your LCD or replacing any of those components?
That's a great question. I have not had to replace anything on this dash. When I bought this car, the dash was 100% functional. So I got very lucky with that. I'm aware that, unfortunately, with these LCDs, they are one of the things we talked about, aging electronics. These are a notorious thing for failure. So that leads me to believe it's probably been replaced at some point in its life, which worked out well for me.
Right. Kurt Winters pro tip. Anytime you're buying a classic or vintage car, you want the previous owner to have invested and fixed things on the car. as opposed to letting them go. So if you get a C4 or a new classic car and components have been changed, whether that's tire, interior pieces, trim pieces, body pieces, this means that the owner actually gave a shit about the car. And again, when you're buying a classic car, the previous owner should improve it. When I buy my cars, I look at myself not as the owner, but as the preservationist and the caretaker for that car, just for a certain period of time. And it's my job to improve the car for the next owner. And now I'm gonna get off my soapbox.
Okay.
Remember, if you like the content of this channel, go ahead and give me a sub. It's free, and hit that notification bell so you can be alerted of the newest uploads to this channel. Now let's get back to the fun.
Okay, so as we're discussing with the car, there's ups and downs of everything you buy. For me, the design cues and the styling of the C4 Corvette, especially from the 80s, were just such a huge selling point for me, and I know it is for a lot of people. And of course, nobody can talk about iconic 1980s C4 without discussing these bad boys right here. I've heard these referred to as turbine wheels. Salad shooters is another common slang for these. These were just a design cue from GM that I think they really nailed and hit right out of the park.
And correct me if I'm wrong, they're designed to channel air away from the brakes.
That's correct. They're there to improve airflow over the brake calipers and, more importantly, over the brake rotor to keep things cool and you don't have warpage or brake fade. This was, people really don't understand that are not in the know with Corvettes. This was a huge leap technologically in many respects from the C3. The C3, you have to remember, was around from what, 68 to basically 1982. It went through a lot of facelifts, kind of similar to how the C4 did during its lifespan. But at heart, it was still a 1960s chassis, 1960s engine technology, and unfortunately even some Malaise era stuff thrown in there.
You bring up a really good point. A lot of people don't know, but the C2 and the C3 are the same chassis.
Yes. Yep. That's
and
correct.
Don McClellan really took this car, took a clean sheet of paper and said, let's build a world beater that most Americans can afford.
That's correct. They wanted a racing car that average everyday working Americans can buy, drive on the road, and enjoy on a daily basis. And I think they really did a phenomenal job with it. It's hard to really understand. We're used to kind of having 700, 800 horsepower machines that you can buy off the lot. But back in the 1980s, to have around 250 horsepower in a V8 engine was a big deal coming out of the 70s.
And a lightweight composite fiberglass body.
Yes, not to mention independent rear suspension, everything. The whole car from the ground up, like you said, built to be a race car. Of course, we have our iconic quad taillights, and of course we have a true dual exhaust with the C4. Something with Corvette that really sets it apart from, say, your Camaro. A lot of people think Camaros have dual exhaust. They do not. That is not true for IROCs. It is true for Corvette, and it really has a pronounced exhaust tone, which we'll see later on. The wonderful thing about Corvettes being fiberglass, or really sheet molded compound is what they refer to it as, but it ultimately is a fiberglass based material. We don't deal with the body rot and the problems we have with conventional cars.
No rust.
No rust.
No dents.
One caveat to that. You still have to look after the subframe. You do have to look at the chassis. That is conventional steel. Although we do have aluminum control arms in the front, we still have conventional steel structure underneath here. So again, for the guys in the salt belt, be careful with your Corvettes, and for the love of God, please wash them. Some things to look out for, and again, my car is no exception. We have some aging, we have some cracking here. It's very difficult to see, but it is here around the plate bracket. Delamination. This is an aftermarket Corvette replacement. True to the correct dimensions, but of course our color palette here is a little bit off. We have some delamination going on here. This is not uncommon to see. And let's go around to the front because I want to show you something else here too. All right, guys, if we're going to talk C4s and we're going to be brutally honest, again, we're talking about a car that's over 30 years old. We have to discuss some of the obvious problems. Weather stripping along doors and along the targa top. In this car, we have some pretty pronounced dry rot going on here. This does leak a little bit. Under light rain, I have not seen it leak, but under downpour, it absolutely will. These are things that, like Kurt was discussing earlier, you want to look for. It indicates whether the car has sat for a long time, whether the previous owner was able to or even cared enough to maintain it. In this case, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some things are all right, some things are not so all right. And on the not so all right side, we have weather stripping problems. So again, and that stripping runs the perimeter of the door jamb, basically all the way from where our frame rail comes in.
It's freaking everywhere.
It's everywhere.
It is everywhere.
And finally, and probably this should have been first, but it's worth pointing out, definitely worth pointing out. Let's talk safety. We discussed how dry rotting sets into door seals. Your tires are not immune from dry rotting either. This car, when I bought it, did have some dry rot running the length of the tread pattern here. That was not bad enough to warrant not traveling with it, but I did have to keep the speed down. And once again, as soon as it got back in my possession, new tires. Absolutely a must. You must put new tires on your Corvette. If you do not want to wreck it, it is not worth getting yourselves hurt over. Guys, watch out for tires and safety things. Brakes are another one too. Of course, everybody loves the classic Corvette emblem. This one happens to be a factory original. It's in okay shape. We do have some minor peeling underneath the clear lacquer that's on here, but overall, the adhesion is good. It's managed to stay on the hood.
OEM to the car.
Yes. But one thing you can, and this is somewhat difficult to see in the lighting, but this whole valance right here is basically plastic, more or less.
It's polyurethane. Yes,
Polyurethane,
sir.
that's
Yes.
right. With that, all things oil-based, whether it's paint, tires, coatings, they're all subject to heating and cooling. And in mine, it's starting to sag where there are not supports for it, and that is normal to see in these cars as they age. So just again, things to look out for cosmetically on the C4 Corvettes, especially ones from the 1980s.
Well, as you guys can see, Matt is much, much smarter than me. I'm all looks and not a lot of brains, but I do get by on my looks pretty good. He is a technical wizard. He's got a lot of detailed information. He gave us a great rundown of his 85 Corvette C4. I really appreciate it, Matt. And let me ask you, now that you've had it for a year of ownership, it's not a car that you just want to go running away from. You love it. You want to keep it. Is that right?
That's right.
And me and Matt were talking off camera earlier. We both kind of had the same opinion. The C4 Corvette was not the most beautiful car when it first caught our eyes. I'm 38. You're how old, Matt?
33.
33. So we kind of grew up in that demographic to where the C4 Corvette, although it was part of our childhood and nostalgia, me and him didn't necessarily think it was the most beautiful car on the road. Yeah. But something really funny happens once you own a C4. Yeah. The more you stare at it and wax it and dump money into it and get looks on the highway, the more you begin to love the body shape. So whether you love the early on 85s, or maybe you like the later generation 94 to 96, these cars really are beautiful once you get them in your garage and you begin to appreciate them. Luckily right now, for us, people like Matt, I can speak for myself, I'm poor. These cars' values, they're in the toilets. So like Matt was saying, you can get a nice example of an early C4 from anywhere from 2 to 5, or you can also get a nice example of a later C4 anywhere from 8 to 12. So right now they're affordable cars, and I don't know a lot of cars out there for that price where you get a big honking V8, plenty of torque, and a lot of fun. So we hope you've enjoyed this video. If you guys like Matt as much as I do, go ahead and drop a comment below. If you don't like Matt, go ahead and drop a comment below. I want to thank you for watching this